Hello and welcome to Black Crow Gaming's first World Eater tactical video. My name is Sam. I'm Black Crow Gaming's faction specialist on World Eaters. I've lived and breathed World Eaters in the competitive scene since they came out towards the end of 9th edition. They've been a favorite faction of mine since I started playing 40k. I still have like multiple old Kharn like metal models, the classic that every old school World Eater player has, but it's never been like it is now, them having their own index and looking forward to their Codex in future. So it's a fantastic time to be into World Eaters. They're strong, they're fun. But I thought I would create this video to sort of explain my thoughts on each, just on World Eaters in general. It will be a series. This is the first in the series. This one I'm going to be focusing on the data sheets and why I think you should take certain units and how you should use them. And talk about some that I might not necessarily use myself, but I can recognize are a tech choice for people to try out and use in their own ways. And I mean, every scene is slightly different as well with different terrain. So I might talk a bit about that. But my expertise comes from UKTC tournaments and a few other UK-based tournaments. But yeah, generally finding quite a good success with that. So I hope you find the video interesting, and if you do, please give it a like. Comment if you've got any extra questions about anything. If I don't explain something fully or you want to know more, please in the comments. I'll be checking them regularly to feedback, and maybe I'll address it in the series. So yeah, starting with data sheets, but we can't really talk about the data sheets without fully understanding the army rule, Blessings of Khorne. Arguably one of the best army rules in the game at the moment. Obviously, everything's balanced around it to a certain extent. Being able to choose two different army-wide buffs every round, and sometimes up to three or more with stratagems. Yeah, it's amazing. But generally, we're looking at using the same ones. So there's +2 move, advance and charge, sustained hits, lethal hits, fight and death and 4+, and extra buff to feel no pain. Now, my standard go-to is pretty much always going to be one of the movement abilities and one of the and feel no pain. Sometimes I might flex into sustained hits. I'm very rarely using the fight on death. But if there is situations where that happens, where it's useful, especially in melee versus melee battles. But even then, I'm finding quite often I'll activate Fight and Death on 4+, and it just doesn't quite go off right, or the opponent just plays around it a bit too easily, and I end up not getting that much benefit from it. My units end up already attacking when they're dying, and it's just like, this isn't. Maybe it would have been better to have a different buff instead for more reliability, because also that 4+ can be very swingy. The Feel No Pain is just a must. Like with the way the army works, it's just such a you've got so much 2 wounds, 3 wounds, and it just makes those so much more survivable with a 6-up, 5-up Feel No Pain for some units that already have a 6-up Feel No Pain. But we'll cover that as we go to each of the units. I don't think I have ever used lethal hits in an event. The army's strong enough as it is. It very rarely needs it. Pretty much always sustained hits is better than lethal. So I would rather have the extra movement to make my charges more reliable, or that's extra survivability from Feel No Pain. But yeah, so that's the Blessings of Khorne. Obviously, feel free to, if you're not familiar with it, feel free to pause the video and read the rule. But yeah, you have to select both at the start of the battle round. There's no saving dice for later. I've seen some people try that before. The only weird interaction rules wise with it is on round 1 you don't get your icon rerolls because you don't control any objectives, which is a shame, but that's just the way the rules work at the start of the game. So sometimes you could have a rough round one because you've not got any rerolls for it. So trying to get that advance and charge, which is the hardest one to get, isn't the most reliable, especially on turn one. All right, next we've got stratagems. I will be going through when I want to use these quite often when I'm talking about the individual units, but generally, we're talking about like I only use 4 of these, I believe. So Gory Massacre, I haven't used this once in a competitive game. I can see a weird interaction where that could be valuable, but even then it's not reliable because battle shock tests could go either way. You want if you really want it to go, but it is nicely done that it happens in their command phase, so it's not like you battle shock them and then they immediately just unbattle shock in their turn. For the Blood Guard, I use pretty much like you know 3 or 4 times a game. It's very good to get that third buff. Means that you can lean into like a more aggressive. If you're going first, a more aggressive style, pick that sustained hit straight off the bat, and then go into Feel No Pain later. Or you can, pick double movement buffs to really cover that distance, and then go into Feel No Pain. And or if you're on the reverse, you get the Feel No Pain for their turn, then you go into combat, and that first unit you pick the one which you're certain you're going to kill the enemy, and then you get sustained hits for the rest of your units to go after that. For the Skull Throne, also one I use loads. You got that +1 to wound against characters, monsters, or vehicles. That's most units in the game in 10th edition. Like it's very rare you're worried about killing a unit that is not a character unit or a monster or a vehicle. Because remember, if a character is leading a unit, that unit counts the character unit. And one of the best things about this as well is if you're in combat with multiple, it's not like you pick a unit and get +1 against it. Your unit gets +1 against those types of units. So if you happen to have a big unit of Berserkers and it's in combat with 3 or 4 different units, you can trigger this and it will give +1 to wound against all units that are characters, monsters, or vehicles. And then the -1 damage strat in Khorne cares not. Sadly, only works in the fight phase, but is crucial to keep some of your units alive when you're getting countercharged and or interrupted on. It's saved my bacon many a time. So we really do want to keep generate a lot of CP early. Sacrificing those secondary cards for like early scoring for those CP generation, because we have quite a few good strats in here. So on the second page, we have Apocalyptic Frenzy, which is fantastic. That auto advance 6 is just like that consistency. You use it to make those huge range things. I'll be talking about max threat ranges of units later on the individual units, but the point is that we have that like reliability for it as well. So it's easy to say, oh, I can go this far, but if you're rolling like 5 or 6 dice to get that far, it's not beneficial. But if you're minimizing the dice you roll, in creating certainty in the game, that's how you will become consistent in winning games. And then Blood Offering, I don't actually end up using that often, but because the opponent knows you have it, will have to play around it. So it forces them to play suboptimally. They have to come onto objectives when they're going to kill you off objectives. And if they don't, you're going to use that. But quite often I find I don't end up having to use it because the opponent will play around it. But yeah, so sticking objectives is very, very good. Great rule that we can just use it on anything at any time. It will quite often equate to at least like 5 points in primary, because why else are you doing it? And that's just for the one turn. If it ends up sticking for later and longer, it can end up giving you a lot of points throughout the game just for 1 CP. Moving on. So enhancements. Once again, I'll go through when I use them on the particular characters, but generally, Favored of Khorne's fantastic for giving you that a little bit more consistency. Like I said about the first turn battle roll, or just that one time you need that advance and charge, that go turn, it's great. And if you don't end up needing it early in the game for that go turn, advance and charge, then later it can be used to help you bring back Angron. Berserker Glaive is just, it's been nerfed. both of those have been nerfed validly. It's still great on Master Executions. I wouldn't take him. I wouldn't take a Master Executions without a Berserker Glaive on at least one of them. Well, you can only take it on one, but the first Master Executions in any list of mine immediately has the Glaive. Battle Lust, I can see. I mean, Heroic is really good. I can see the argument, especially if you're putting it on something like a Massive Executions, because of the fight first. But with Heroic only being 1 CP now, I feel like Battle Lust is, if I've written a list that has a character spare that doesn't have an enhancement, I have 10 points left over, then Battle Lust goes in. But other than that, I don't see a use of it. Helm is really good on things like Daemon Princes, make them tankier. But as you'll see in a bit, I'm not a huge fan of the Daemon Prince for its points cost. So yes, Helm makes it tankier, and I think if you're going to be going into that sort of list, then I think it's worth taking. But I haven't used one in a tournament yet. So right, Angron. If you're writing an army list for World Eaters, put Angron in. I know that I will say it is possible to go and win games without Angron. You are making your life harder for yourself if you are not using Angron. That is point number one. Like, he's the most important model in the army. He gives us rerolls to hit. His auras, rerolls to hit or +1 to charge. Those are the only two you're going to pick. The third one's awful. Don't worry about it. I always say to my opponent at the start of the game, I'm going to always pick rerolls to hit unless I specify otherwise. That just saves any confusion for later, because sometimes on the first round you're going to pick rerolls to hit, and then maybe you'll shoot a Rhino here or a Forgefiend or something, and it's within 6 of Angron, and it does work in shooting from turn 2 onwards, because turn 1 you're shooting faces before your charge phase when you select the buff. So you always want to do it. Turn 1 will probably always be you want the default to be reroll hits. So I have seen people talk about putting him in reserve. He does have deep strike, and so you can rapid ingress him into interesting places and get a good charge. I don't think this is worth it. Whenever I have tried this, it just gives my opponent too much free roam on moving across the board and not being scared of a big scary Angron. I don't get any rerolls on any of my early combats because of it. So I like him as a big threat on the board. Now, I usually play quite conservative with him. I won't set him up on the line if there's any threat of the opponent shooting and killing him. So he's quite often hidden. But the point is he's so fast. He can go up to 22 inches before charging on a turn, and he flies. So when you have 22 inches, you can actually fly over these smaller ruins quite easily if they're in the sort of middle of your movement. I did one recently where I had 20-inch movement because I did the auto advance 6, but I didn't have the +2 to move. And I did I think it was worked out as about 17 inches by flying over a building. So yeah, it's surprisingly fast when you're when the building is in the middle. It's like you've just breached it and for a couple of inches. It can surprise opponents quite a bit when you do that. Depending on the terrain, I mean, UKTC terrain, most of the ruins are quite tall, which makes that a bit more difficult to do, but you fly around, and because of how fast you are, you do just get into places. But I don't really look for first turn charges with Angron. He's there as a threat to scare the opponent off the midboard. You move him into a safe-ish place in the midboard, and they're not coming anywhere near you. Because he's not as reliable to revive anymore, because Favored was nerfed. I play a lot more safe with Angron. Keep him there for those reroll hits, for those anchor moments, and send him out when my entire army's out. So if they're trying to kill him, they're not killing Eightbound, they're not killing Rhinos, Berserkers, the rest of my army. They are having to focus on the big scary monster in front of them that might just revive the next turn. Generally in combat, he just kills what he touches. There's not much that stands up to him. His sweep profile is incredibly good at clearing out screens and marine-based profiles, and the smash just takes stuff out with the full rerolls, and you quite often will end up getting things like sustained hits. You can end up getting 10+ hits from quite quite consistently from the smash, which just means he chews through vehicles and heavy infantry reasonably well. He doesn't have a way of getting through invulnerable saves, so that can be where his crutch comes into. If they've got a lot of 4+ invulnerables, your output significantly decreased. Yeah, Angron, put him in the list. Just put him in. Consider all World Eater lists as 1,585 points plus Angron, because that's what it is really. Daemon Prince, if you're going a very infantry heavy based list, I can see the argument of putting him in. He was obviously better before the nerf when he could make Jakhals have a 4 invuln. The problem is I don't feel like he supports 8-bound very well because he's quite a bit slower than them, even though his move stat isn't that much slower. When you take into account breaching, he falls behind very quickly, and in combat he really doesn't do it. Like, yeah, getting dev wounds on a charge is great, but AP2 with 6 attacks, you're just not killing stuff realistically. You're not getting enough damage through. His sweep has AP 0, which is just atrocious into anything that isn't crap that your whole army will deal with no matter what. So for 200 odd points, I think he's not bad on the tanky side of things, but he doesn't really impact the board enough to me. If you're not taking 100 Jakhals, it feels not really worth it for the aura, because it's just really hard to keep everything near him enough to keep the aura in it, and have him in a place where he's not just going to get targeted and killed by the opponent's heavy weapons. And then the winged Daemon Prince now is an interesting one, because you can use him as sort of like a targeted missile. You deep strike him in, you pick a target at the start of the game that you're just going to go for. You deep strike him in, and he will run and should do very well into that unit. Problem is, he still has those same weapon profiles. We're still talking about AP2 with 6 attacks, and 14 attacks at AP nothing. Like, it's not bad, and like the battle shock thing could work out well in certain situations where they really want to use the strat, but generally, I can't see him being worth his points. He's just a very expensive monster that I just think bounces off stuff too much, considering it's World Eaters when we just don't have trouble killing stuff generally. I think Demon Princes don't have the attack profiles they should for being worth the points they are. Like I say, it's also lower toughness. That toughness 9 is a big breakpoint for a lot of things around strength 9, 10. So it makes them less tanky as well. Once again, not a bad helm target, but it's just so many points that you could just do more with other things. Invocatus. So I said Angron was an auto pick. Invocatus is as close as it gets other than that. He is in every single list I've written. He's fantastic. Yes, he can be his scout ability that he gives to 2 units can quite often be countered by infiltrating units, but it forces your opponent to do it. Right, I quite often spread my deployment, so I have scouting units all over. So sort of Invocatus and 2 infantry units will be in the middle, and then some normal 8-bound will be on the sides. And that way, they have to if they really want to stop me scouting everywhere, they have to cover a lot of area. And if they do that, they are losing a bunch of their scoring units, because not everyone writes lists specifically to beat World Eaters. When they write those lists with those infiltrating units in mind, those units are quite often their little scoring units, and what they're doing to stop us from getting huge threat ranges turn 1, they are sacrificing their squishy scoring units, which will help you massively later in the game of just getting units into those. But you don't want to overcommit onto them, so you don't just throw your whole army into their screens that they've set up in the middle. You want to throw little units like Jakhals. I find that I quite often will scout my Jakhals with Lord Invocatus and just throw them forward into the enemy. Tag one back for one of my units into the home objective to get that sticky at the start, but Jakhals I use quite aggressively to clear out, scout units or mandrakes or rangers for Eldar, and small units of like like pathfinders or whatever. The infiltrating units that people quite often have are often they're like little squishy scorers, and they don't really want them to die. They're just having to stop you. And I never put Invocatus in a unit, although his fallback and charge is really, really useful for like a 6-man Exalted Eightbound unit against matchups where you're like fighting like hordes of orcs, or things like that, where you might get tied up. I can see an argument for it there. But when I talk about clearing out these little units at the start that they block the scout with, I quite often will do it with a solo Lord Invocatus. He's a great little guy. He does, not huge amounts of damage, but he's got 8 attacks on the charge plus his mount, which is number 4. So he got 12 at damage 2. He's a good little marine killer. He's got dev wounds and lance on the thing. So there's quite often he can just do just enough to clear a bunch of models out that you just don't want to have to deal with, and he'll stand on objective very proudly, do an action, and he's surprisingly tanky as well. So with 8 wounds at toughness 6 to 4 up, he's very hard to shift without having to commit a decent amount. So one of my favorite units to run in an army list. Like I say, I don't run a list without him. The scouting, the infantry is so good. It puts the threat of scouting huge Exalted Eightbound bricks, but quite often the reality is, well, that doesn't need to commit turn 1. I'll send out the Jakhals, and then they'll sit in the middle and be like, oh, turn 2, we're going to stick this if you don't kill us. So it gets that going, and screens. You can use it to screen out of melee armies as well. Juggernaut is quite often I put my favorite of Khorne on a Juggernaut, sit him on my home objective. When opponents have deep striking units like Seraphim and Scouts and Inceptors and all these things where it's like small units that just deep strike into your home area, he sits there and goes, no. Now, he's like, his big issue is AP1, right? Why he has AP1, I have no idea. He's a World Eater Lord, and he has only AP1, but he has a lot of attacks. He does mortals on the charge, and so he once again is tanky. 7 wounds, 2 up, 4 up, toughness 6. Not an easy model to shift. I just stick him on my home objective, so he sits there with favored for when I'm ready to use it. And then once my opponent doesn't have any deep strike, stuff left, shenanigans to bring in the backfield, he then moves out and sort of helps hold objectives, do actions in the mid to late game. Quite often is quite a nice little finisher to units that have just survived here or there, and you can charge them in and finish them off towards the late game. Kharn, great with Berserkers. Some people have had some success running him solo. I think he can put out a lot of damage. One of our few good sources of damage free. I think he works really, really well with Berserkers, especially coming in a Rhino. Then his negative effect doesn't come in. But yeah, he's just his fight on death's really good as well. I think Kharn is my second leader for Berserker's choice. The first being Massive Executions, which is the next one. I think he's great. He can put out a lot of damage. Sadly, strength 6 up to 7 doesn't quite make that breakpoint for wounding on 2s against most normal infantry, but he doesn't need it. He has reroll 1s in a unit and usually chews through stuff quite effectively. If you like Kharn, it's good to take him at the moment. If you like Berserkers, go for it. He's not currently on one of my lists, but he has been in lists in the past. And if Berserkers were better, he would be in every list. But I think the main problem is Berserkers in general are not that great at the moment. Master Executions, huge scary piece with the Berserker Glaive. That damage free with 6 or 7 attacks, fight first, precision. Just basically, he runs into any character unit and just with full rerolls against characters, he just takes out the character. He's like, all right, character's dead, and here's a chunk of stuff on the squad as well. I've seen him do huge things. I've once gotten 15 hits with him, which was stupid. No, it doesn't add up. There's 13 hits. 13 hits. And because I just rolled a ridiculous amount of sustained hits, and it was just like, oh, okay, this is happening now. And he just wiped a squad by himself. He's really, really good into character units. He'll chew through their special character with invulnerable save because of the devil wounds, and then the rest of your unit can finish off whatever's there. The fight first makes him scary to be like countercharged, and with heroic being 1 CP, I've literally won games because my opponent did charges out of order, and Master Executioners just went, oh, you're going after Angron over there with this nasty charge. Let me just heroic in and kill you before you get to hit him. It's just so effective. There are lists now that are going less into Master Executions, but it's hard to it's really hard for me to not put him in the list. I think he's fantastic. He's such a threat on the table. He sits with 10 Berserkers in a Rhino, and then they just launch out at high speed and go up to what is it, 17 inches before charge if with all the right buffs, but realistically we're talking about 14ish inches. No, wow. That's sort of like an average if you don't use the CP. But the oh, it's 15 without the +2 with the CP, and yeah. But anyway, fast coming out of a Rhino, and can just clear whatever they. It's rare that they hit a unit and don't kill it, because if they do, you're probably sending them into the wrong target. The problem is the AP. Again, AP2, but Dev Wounds really helps it for him. But then with Berserkers, they're great with the Blood Surge move. They are fantastic with the amount of attacks they have. The strength 6. I mean, they just ruin things like Sisters and anything that's toughness 3. But and are great into things that are toughness 5 because 3 is and if they're a character unit or anything like that, you can get the +1 to wound as well. With Kharn, they can have reroll 1s. The problem is they're AP1, right? Like you go into a unit of Terminators and they pop Armor of Contempt, you are bouncing hard off that unit. You are not killing it. So they're 90 points for 5 at the moment. I think that's a lot better than where they were with 100. But I still think that they are being held up by the characters. I would never expect to see Khorne Berzerkers in a list without character units, without characters leading them, because it's the characters that do most of the work at the moment. And Massive Executions with Berserker Glaive and Kharn, damage free with both of those are so crucial to World Eaters, and the Berserkers are just sort of we'll get you there and keep you alive a little bit longer while you are there. Although in recent history, I've not seen Berserkers living through an activation. There's a lot of stuff in the game that just will clear them, and that's partly a problem. Or if they won't clear them, they'll throw some grenades at them or do some other shenanigans that means that you don't get the blood surge before, or they're far enough away that the blood surge isn't going to be impactful enough. So Berserkers, I love them. I want to use loads of them, but at the moment I'm maxing at 10, and I'm writing quite a few lists at the moment that don't have any Berserkers in them and don't have any Master Executions because of it. But yeah, moving on. The Jakhals, best battle line unit, like fantastic unit, sticky objectives, innate feeling of pain, which means I've got a 5-up feeling of pain, which makes them just silly tankier than they should be. People shoot them with piddly shots thinking, that'll get rid of them. And they're like, oh, no, half of us are still here. They are surprisingly tanky for what they are. They're cheap. They actually do slap quite well into combat, especially if they've got Angron rerolls, because their main issue is them hitting on 4s. If they if you have a Skull Smasher and Mauler Chainblade in there, and those two pop off, you can just wipe a Marine unit just with those two models. Especially with Angron rerolls, it's not that ridiculous to do because they're both wounding on 3s, and with sustained hits, Skull Smasher is the only one in the unit that doesn't have sustained hits, but you might have it army wide. So yeah, the sticky objective, icon reroll. Yeah, Jakhals are I put at least 2. Well, I put 2 units in my army list if I can. There's a couple of lists I've written which are down to 1, but there's no way you don't put 1 in. I think 2 is the perfect number. You have 1 that sticks your home objective at the start, 1 that gets scouted forward by Invocatus, and you just put pressure on that way. Usually clear an infiltrating screen or just cover some middle objectives and go, you need to kill me. If you don't, I'm going to stick this objective, and if you do and don't come close enough, I'm going to stick the objective with CP. So they're fantastic units for this, and like I say, surprisingly killy into opponent screens. So it's a good way of starting that early fighting without having to commit an important unit. An expensive unit, I guess, because like I say, these guys are great. They can screen out a home field quite well as well if your opponent's got a lot of deep strike threats, because 10-man unit spread. Chaos Spawn. So Spawn are incredible. I mean, Art of War said that this was the best unit in non-character, non-monster or vehicle unit in 10th edition right now. And I'm inclined to agree with them. I still only have 1 in my list because it's kind of I'm struggling to commit to putting lots of more scoring units in. But they're so good. They just don't die when they should. Well, it feels like they should. People are hitting them with silly stuff, and they just stand there and go, "I have a 4 Fiona Pain" when the Fiona Pain buff is active, and they just shrug it off. I've had, units of warp talents go into them and kill 1 out of the 2, and get slapped back and lose like 3 guys because damage 2. I've had like characters that are quite good in combat, good shooting, just go into them and just be like, oh no, you're nothing. They on the charge with D6 plus 3 attacks each, strength 7, AP 1, 2 damage. Yeah, the AP 1 isn't ideal, but they're 65 points for 2. He's not expecting a lot, but they just hit surprisingly hard. Forced to hit, yes, but once again, Angron nearby or sustained hits, and you're suddenly getting quite a few hits. And the high strength really, really helps. Toughness 5 makes it hard for them to be wounded by piddly shots. And yeah, 4 up armor save, usually probably getting cover save. So usually getting some form of save plus that 4 up Fiona Pain. It's just so hard to deal with. And then they heal. So you put a bit of damage into them, and they go, before you go again, they're going to be back to full health. Now they don't revive, but they also don't need to take battle shock because there's only 2 models. So when 1 dies, they're at half, but they're not below half. So yeah, really, really strong unit. Terminators, not a unit I am a fan of. I don't like them because they are slow. They don't hit as hard as you wish they would. Yes, they've got a bit of shooting to clear out screens a bit, but and their rule is just not great. A rule which requires you to be damaged and you don't have any way of like self damage is kind of rough because to get the most out of this, you want a 10-man unit. This is a very bulky unit that's going to get bogged down by screens and it's not very slow. Yes, World Eaters are fast, and we can have the fastest Terminators in the game, but they're still slow Terminators. Their rules aren't that great, and they are expensive, and there's no leader that can go with them. And they can get 6 up Fiona Pain, but it doesn't really save them as much as you would hope. A 5 up makes that huge difference when it comes to that. So you're quite often comparing these with Exalted Eightbound, and they just don't compare. Power Fists and Chain Fists aren't as good, and they just have too few attacks. And if you have a big 10-man squad, it's just using up so many points. So yeah, I'm not a fan of them personally. And if you disagree with me and you're finding great success, come tell me in the comments and tell me I'm wrong. But I wish you well if you want to use them. I just don't think they fit with the way that I like to play the army, which is fast and aggressive, but in a way that goes, I'm going to scare you away, but not necessarily have to commit my entire army into you to do that. 8-bound, I think you need one minimum 8-bound unit in your army. I like 2. That aura of reroll 1s to wound is insanely good. If you're ever getting the full rerolls, it's even better. But just having Eightbound in the mix with the rest of your army is just so fantastic. They're good little skirmish units as well. Quite often we'll just go and clear an objective and just sit there. And yes, they'll probably die on the clapback, but they're consistent at dealing with those sort of pesky enemy units that are a little bit too tough for Jakhals and Spawn to kill, but not something you want to commit a load of Exalted Eightbound or Angron into or anything like that. But when you, on the go turn, when you throw a lot of your army into the opponent, you want at least one of these units somewhere in there because it is a massive, most of our stuff, it's, wounds on threes because we've got high strength across the board, or twos, and those reroll ones just is a massive multiplier. It's so useful. They're so fast, they're so great. I mean, everyone loves the Eightbound, so I don't think I need to harp on too much about this, but put Eightbound in your list. Exalted Eightbound, better versions of Eightbound. I mean, you want a mixture of both, but you want more Exalted Eightbound than you want Eightbound. I would say 2x3 Eightbound, and then like at least 1/6 and maybe 2/3s of Exalted. You could go more, you could go less, but some of my lists have only 9 Exalted, but there's still a 6. You want that 6 for strats, basically. If you're putting -1 damage on something, you want it to be a big unit. If you're putting auto advance 6 on something, you want it to be a big unit, because then if you're doing +1 to wound, you want it to be a big unit because it's more effect for your CP. And also, you love to do with the 6-man Exalted, with their aura of no fallback. If they fail a leadership, it lets you sort of ram into stuff and then just tag a load of stuff and then just go, well, if one of these fails, you're not shooting this unit because it's infantry. So that's usually quite a lot often the strategy with that 6-man. Quite often also scouted with Invocatus. If there's no scout blocking coming in front of you, it can be incredibly oppressive to just make that first in charge. I mean, I can think of 2+ games straight off the top of my head recently that I've won because Exalted Eightbound got in, the 6-man Exalted Eightbound got in turn 1, killed a unit, tagged something else. Something else failed its leadership, and the 6 Eightbound was still mostly left alive by the end of the game, even though they've been in combat in my opponent's deployment zone the entire game, and you just win the game. It's fantastic. They are so good. The sweep profile is what you use a surprising amount of time, unless you're going into a vehicle or monster, because hitting on 2s instead of 3s, but then wounding instead on 3s instead of 2s is like that's usually a fair balance if you think about the maths of it. But you have 2 extra attacks. So the only time you consider it differently is when the AP matters. So if you're not going into something that's got like an invulnerable save or crappy armor save, or you've got Angron there, so you're getting the rerolls to hit. So maybe you don't necessarily need the 2s to hit, and so that might help a lot as well. But if you're into anything that's toughness 3, that sweep is amazing. Forgefiend. So the Forgefiend is making a comeback, right? I mean, you're seeing it in some popular lists. I think that it has its place, mainly because of its reduced points than where it was before. Its ability is okay. It has its like uses. It can go off well, but the main thing it does is keep your opponent honest. You don't want to have the if you don't have any shooting in your list, your opponent doesn't need to hide behind terrain. You just stand in whatever optimal place there is for them to stand. Now, if you have 1 or 2 Forgefiends in the list, they now have to think about it. Now, I don't think the Forgefiends really put out, maybe both 2 of them into one target will do enough to kill something, but I don't think one Forgefiend really is that scary of a range threat. But I think just the fact that there is a range threat puts that bit of worry into the opponent. And maybe lets you kill 1 or 2 models that gives you a gap to charge through. So it is I think it's a nice tech piece if you like it in your list, to force your opponent to play slightly suboptimally, and have to worry about hiding some of their units that they wouldn't necessarily normally hide against a World Eater player. So I think there's quite a lot of good aspects from there. And other than that, they, sometimes we want to go hard and heavy forward, and we don't have anyone stand on objectives, and they will stand on objectives as well. So they're not bad. I can definitely see them. I haven't had the chance to put mine on the table in a tournament yet, but like I say, I don't think they do over amounts of damage. They do get Angron rerolls from turn 2 onwards if he's done the reroll aura, but which will help them a lot. But they don't get any other buffs from the army. There's no strats we can use. There's nothing. The only thing they can really benefit other than that is +2 move, because obviously the move isn't ideal as well on such a big model. But yeah, I think if you want to put a bit of shooting in, this is your choice. I wouldn't go anywhere near Predators or anything else other than maybe the Lawless Skulls, but we'll come to that. Right. The Maulerfiend. So Maulerfiend's an interesting one. So I don't think it's as good as Exalted Eightbound. I don't use the Maulerfiend. If you want to use it, it depends on your terrain as well. UKTC, I think he really struggles because there's a lot of big terrain you have to run around, and then you just don't really get where you want to go. It is slightly faster than the Forgefiend, and does have the Scent of Blood. So if you do have something like a Forgefiend maybe, or a Lord of Skulls, or some other shooting, you can hurt something and give you that bonus to charge. I think he's not a bad rapid ingress target for Strat Reserve, because it's quite a big thing. Like, it's quite easy for the opponent to screen out, but not easy to deal with when you rapid ingress it. So if you rapid ingress it in, they have to have a good amount of anti-tank shots in that line of sight. So it's usually you can set it up in a way that doesn't matter. I would recommend the Magma Cutters over the Lasher Tendrils, because as weird as that sounds, Lasher Tendrils, if you're in to a target that the Lasher Tendrils are good into, you're in the wrong target. If you're not, things aren't going well. Because you put it this way, the Lasher Tendrils, they're killing 4 guardsmen, maybe 3 or 4 guardsmen. If that's not helping if you're surrounded by Imperial Guard, right? That's what Berserkers, that's what Jakhals, that's what normal Ain't you've got loads of things that are good at killing lots of small things. You want your Maulerfiend to go into big things. And those Magma Cutters, it's just when you're in combat, you can still use them. And also just when you're moving up, if you get within that 6-inch range, they are quite effective. Popping transport or something like that to get you a juicy charge, or just setting up your want to hit combat. So yeah. Helbrutes. Helbrutes is an interesting one. A lot of people love them. A lot of people are like, really? Helbrutes can be amazing, right? I think the preferred loadout for Helbrutes is the double fist with the flamers. But yeah, they have the potential to kill your opponent's entire army in one turn. They're not going to, but they could. Every time they get hit in combat and in shooting, they get to either fight or shoot. Now, that's incredible. You charge into something, you kill it, you pile into something else, it hits you, you then hit that. Problem is that they only have 8 wounds and a 2-up save. There's no invuln. They're only toughness 9. They usually can just be killed. As much as you really there will be that odd time they just pop off and just go crazy and go, oh, it killed this vehicle and then that vehicle and then that vehicle because my opponent set it up badly and let me get into a position that would work, because your opponent has to make a mistake to allow that to happen. They're just not going to do what you want them to. They move 6 inches. They have to go around walls. That is a struggle to get them where you want them to go. Yes, you could strat reserve and rapid ingress potentially, but now you're using resources on them, and your opponent still you might just kill one thing and then your opponent turns around and goes, it's dead. I really want them to be good, but they're just too squishy for me. So I don't like them. But people have had success with 3 of them in a list. I think if you're going to commit to it, commit to it, because that way they can't kill them all in one shot potentially. But yeah, I think that if they were tankier, they would be amazing, but they sadly are not tanky. Speaking of tanky, Lord of Skulls, fantastic model. I love it. Big demon train. I think it's got some great shooting potential. It's good in combat. It's big, so hard to maneuver around certain terrain maps. I wouldn't use it on UKTC, but some of the other ones, I mean, it's great on GW. Like GW terrain, it is fantastic. It has the time of its life. I think the best part about Lord of Skulls is you take it with at least one with Angron. If you take two, that's that's a skew and a half. And if your opponent can deal with Lords of Skulls, then you're gonna have a bad time. If they can't, you're gonna have a fantastic time. But take them with Angron. Um, they have to kill the Lord of Skulls either at the same time or before they kill Angron, because if they don't, you're just going to bring back Angron. It's too easy. Lord of Skulls can finish off 1 or 2 units a turn, and just making that 666 to be a 5 and 2 6s or 2 5s and a 6 with things like favored and icon rerolls, it's just surprisingly reliable to bring back Angron. So it's just not worth it for your opponent to focus Angron. So you play aggressive with Angron, try and make them focus down Angron, and then have the Lord of Skulls sort of cleaning up units behind it. And then when they do kill Angron, you go, haha, he's back. So it's not the Lord of Skulls is no longer super expensive. It is expensive for points, but I can see the use. I've used one in a tournament in a local RTT and done well. It is much more terrain specific than pretty much anything else in the list. He just needs decent terrain, because also some terrain maps you might not even be able to get him out of your deployment zone. He's not as wide as a Land Raider, but he's not far from it. So yeah, that's the gist of the Raw Skulls. So that was very quick. I ran through all of the data sheet. Now, obviously, some are missing. If I didn't mention the data sheet here, it's because I didn't think it was necessarily worth talking about. I mentioned Predators very briefly. Don't worry about them. Defiler, also don't worry about. But if you think I skimmed over something too quickly or missed something that or you disagree with what I said, please put something in the comments. Talk to me on the World Eater Discord, on the Black Crow Discord. But yeah, please. I hope that you found this video interesting. I will be doing more in the future. Next one, I think I will be planning to do a charging phase tactics video, or charge and fight phase. So I'll go through some scenarios about how to try and get around fight first, how to get around screens, and how to best play your charge phase and fight phase, because there is so many intricate shenanigans you can do about bouncing models around and the piling and consolidating and things like that. And the charge phase, with tank shock and other things, it's I think well worth a whole video dedicated to that. So I thought I'd do the baseline with this one, go through all the units, so then from the next ones onwards, you can understand why I'm only specifically talking like, oh, when you have Eightbound in this situation, and not saying when you have Terminators in this situation. But yeah, please give this video a like and subscribe if you like it, and any feedback is welcome. But for now, I think that is me done. So I'm Sam from Black Crow Gaming, Cypher on the World Eater Discord. I hope you enjoy.